you remember the first step before we even read? Awareness. Now, this can be anything you want it to be. Really, it's just about connecting to yourself before you read. And this reminds you that this is a creative art form, not math homework. Okay? You're not designing engineering schematics. You're not building a suspension bridge. You are just trying to connect to yourself any way you can. Some people that's meditation, some people that's music, some people that's just screaming. I don't care what it is you do. A friend of mine, and if they're listening on this Facebook Live, I'm sorry, I'm about to out you. He masturbates before he reads. Whatever gets you out of your head. Out of your head. So that you can read it like a little kid. Okay? Which is step 2. Read. And in your reading, you want to utilize your imagination to visualize material. And as Valencia said, read it like a book. Right? Mm-hmm. And the minute you give that level of freedom to what you're doing, you're automatically breaking right or wrong context. Okay? If I'm letting myself just read, and in reading, I'm also, as with visualizing material, I'm also absorbing material, words, and story.
Question.
Yeah.
You always read out loud. Like
I do. I really think that's up to you, Deborah. I think you got to be willing to go. For you, I need to hear it. Mm-hmm. Some people don't. Some people can sit and read it and just kind of hear it in their head. I need to talk it out. I don't know why. Part of it's just the concept of my creativity that needs to, because when I read something, want to see what the character looks like. Mm-hmm. Want to see what the character they're talking to looks like. So reading it out loud cements that, substantiates that. I don't know if you need to all the time, but I always tell people, try it. Do one with, do one without. Do you know what I mean? Because if you read silently and your head starts jumping to I have to, then you're in trouble.
For me too, reading out loud makes it more real than what's up in my head.
I agree. And it lets my creativity start doing things in strange ways. Like my body starts reacting to what I read. Mm-hmm. I start getting into connections really strangely. It's almost like through osmosis, I'm starting to feel something out for the character. So it's really up to you. Okay? Okay. Step 3, guys, is what?
First impression.
First impression. Absolutely. Okay. Now, remember, you could start, the minute you read, start making notes on just what you read. Okay? So as I'm reading, I can start going, especially for this side, breakup, relationship, ex-boyfriend, Victor. Just start making very specific notes, okay? When I get to my first impression, I'm going to categorize these notes in 3 categories. First is character. Second is what? Circumstance. And third is what? Story. So when we talk about character, what are we talking about?
Life of the person.
The life of the person you are playing. Part of that life includes the backstory. And I make a chart this simply, guys. Character, circumstance, story. Part of that's going to be backstory. What also is going to be part of that? Relationship. Okay? When I look at my notes from the first impression and think about the circumstance, what's really the circumstance? The present reality of the material. Present reality of scene. And we're going to clarify that in a second when we get to the 5 W's, right?
And previous circumstance.
And previous circumstance, absolutely. What happened right before. Okay. When I think of story, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about what the character wants. What else?
Conflict.
The conflict, most importantly. Okay? And you got to think of also how that conflict plays out. Okay? Is that clear for everybody? We make this chart as a simple way to categorize what our impressions led to. Did they lead to clarification of character? Did they lead to clarification or awareness of circumstance? Or do they lead to clarification and awareness of story? Remember, you're going to have some of your first impressions that might fit 2 or all 3 of these categories. That is fine. It is also a quick way to review how your instincts operated, your instinctual choices. What's your instinctual choices, how they operated and what they saw. Okay? Is there questions on this? Your first impression, guys, is the first place you show up. So you want to always hold on to them. It doesn't mean that the detail won't fully be there. It just means you're allowing you to be the first and foremost priority, as opposed to what you feel the casting director, or anybody else would want. Is that clear? Any questions on these 3 steps?
So if you don't have something from the first impression, just leave it.
Just leave it. Your first impression sometimes can be questions.
Right.
Do you get me? And you can put those questions into the category. You know, I'm curious about the life. Like for you, the book might be a question for her, right? Did she write it? Did she contribute to it? When did she read it? How did she find it? When did she see it? All that could be just questions for her. Because that would lead to another element of her conflict as well, right? Okay. Any other questions on 1, 2, 3?
Where would you put in time? Would that be part of the circumstances?
That's part of the present reality, right?
Okay, so how long have they been separated?
Well, that's backstory,
okay.
Right?
Okay.
So you have to know, like, are you talking about the time that they've been at the restaurant? In other words, you could have made the choice that they've been there for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Do you get me? Which to me is a very interesting choice, because that leads to a clarification of previous circumstance. She's been sitting in this tension, waiting for her beer. Do you get me? And that would give me a really interesting, especially on a self-tape, that would give me an interesting moment of really connecting to place, right? I've been looking around, waiting. You know, is he going to say something? Am I going to say something? What's going to happen here, you know? And you got to remember, they met, this is this kind of the second time they met, right?
Yeah.
So they've seen each other, then they're sitting down now. That might be awkward. So I must be in the awkward, okay, what's going to happen here? Do you get me? And that could lead me. So you know, you have to know when you're talking about time, are you talking about backstory? Are you talking about circumstance, the present reality, or are you talking about what happened right before?
I'm also thinking of what caused the breakup and how much.
Yeah, that's backstory, absolutely.
Backstory also.
You know, what's interesting to me about that is that, again, you can leave it as a question on your first impression. You know, because how long since she saw him? When was the last time they were together? Do you know what I mean? And that goes back to, remember, she has that line of, or he has that line of, I left, right? Or no, you went to California.
Yeah.
Was that a year ago? Was that 6 months ago? I think for a character like this, and this would be part of my connection to her life, that she would not jump into a new relationship that quickly. This to me would happen almost a couple of years ago, for me, for Jessie. Just because Jessie seems the type after this relationship where she got her heart broken, that she would take time to find Victor. For me,
Yeah.
Victor would not be, I'm running to the first guy that treats me well. Do you know? She doesn't seem like that type. But again, that's part of my understanding of who she is and part of the life. Okay? Clear?
Yeah.
Okay, any questions about these three?
Do you usually make choices which rise the stakes, right? Like,
Well, I'm not necessarily making that many choices. I'm just categorizing what I saw. So in that, there might be a choice. Like in this element of conflict that I'm seeing in terms of playing Fenton, I might go, hey, you know, this loneliness that happened after my dad died was killer. You know, it really killed me. And I've been kind of secluded, going back to life, right? I've been isolated for maybe the last 4 to 5 months, dealing with the death of my father. And that has created a necessity to see her right now. Do you get me? So I'm seeing it's not necessarily choices as much as from what I'm reading, what do I start to see? Do you know?
What makes you feel?
Yeah, well, what I'm feeling, where do my imagination take this guy? How does he look? I mean, to me, there's something very interesting about what he wants. He seems the type to not really have a real sense of empathy for what he did to her. If he really did, I don't know if he would be back right now. The timing of when he comes back to me, playing the character of Fenton, tells me a lot about him. That he's doing it right now. You know, that he didn't call before, that he didn't ask her, that he, you know what I mean? There's an immediacy with him in this. And I would give that, because I'm always trying to take the perspective on which we're going to talk about today, the last step of having empathy for the guy. So in my empathy for him, I'd go, yeah, you know, he just realized after this death, and after being isolated and depressed for this long, that now he knows. Now he knows he screwed up and he's really willing to take it to the next level. Okay? What's step 4, guys?
Second impression.
Second impression. So again, we're rereading. And this second impression does what?
Energy.
Well, we're going through reading slow. Slow down, right? Sentence by sentence. Line by line. Okay? This is the most difficult part of the thing to do, right? You just read it, you started to categorize it, you started to put your different choices and all these things, but you now get to slow the hell down and read sentence by sentence and line by line. Why? So that you can what?
Know what you're sending and receiving.
Absolutely. So know to start defining or putting on or specifying the energy you are sending and receiving. Sending and receiving. You want to be as specific as you possibly can. It only has to make sense to you. Now, the trick is to see if you can, this is not an absolute, but to see if you can use verbs in terms of defining your energy, so the energy gets sent out, so that you are doing something, not just sitting there and feeling something. Okay? So you make sure, because there's a lot of actors who act great in terms of the psychological understanding of the character, but don't send it through the lens. Don't send it through the audience. And verbs help with that. It puts you in what we call action. Okay? And again, these choices only have to make sense to you. They do not have to make sense to anybody else. When you read each sentence and each line, whether it's dialogue or description, know there's energy being sent and received. Sent and received. Whether it's dialogue or description. And you guys can start to see now, when you read descriptions or parentheticals, they should inspire choices. They shouldn't be things that you absolutely feel like you have to do. They should be things that inspire choices. So if there's a pause, what hopefully you can start to see is a pause or a beat should inspire you to see that this character is exposing something emotionally. Inspire you to see that this character is exposing something emotionally. If the moment is where they pull a gun on the character, you have to define what that energy is that they are sending by pulling the gun, so you do not feel like you have to mine the gun. If you feel like you have to, then do. But don't feel like it's absolutely necessary. If your character starts running away and all of a sudden you start running in place, you're going to look like a crazy person. Okay? So you want to see what that inspires in you. If the scene is you're driving in a car and you get a fake steering wheel, I've seen this, you get a fake steering wheel for yourself taped and you're sitting there driving the car, I'm going to go, okay, yeah, not absolutely necessary. Do you guys get me? It's more of the energy in connection to the overall circumstance. The energy in connection to the overall circumstance that we want to see when we see description or parentheticals. They should be inspirational things, not things that make you feel you have to replicate or duplicate what is put in the script. Okay, they should lead to inspiring. Okay, what's step 5?
Event.
The event. Clarification of the event. And you always want to put the event as a time in the character's life when.
Connects to you.
Absolutely. Well, that's the way we connect it to you.
Yeah. Being super objective.
Well, hold on, honey. We're not there yet. Hold on. So once we get a time in the character's life when, we are starting to really define or build our bridge to the overall circumstance, our bridge to the event.
What if you have like 3 events? You write down all 3 if you can decide, so you can decide later.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have to know it by the end of your, by the definition of the event. Once you get to, you're starting to clarify it here, honey. But, you know, look, if I have 3 choices, I'm going to go back and start to see which choice, when I execute it, which choice resonates the strongest for me. Sometimes we get a little caught in this. This sometimes doesn't need to have a bridge. You can automatically go a time in the character's life when they feel like they have to move on. Sometimes that's enough for me. I don't need to put it in my terms, like a time in my life where where I've moved on. Sometimes seeing this allows me to clarify the event. But once I start to see what I am sending and receiving, once I look back at my chart, I can start to make this clarification in a way that stays this simple. A time in the character's life when. And that gives us an overall sensation of the event. Is that clear for everybody? Yeah, honey.
It builds a bridge to what?
It builds our bridge to the to connect to the event.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So defining event can give you overall sensation, right?
Absolutely. Defining the event sometimes can be your intimate connection. Do you get me to the overall circumstance? Remember, there is a reason the circumstance occurred, the circumstance occurred or evolves around an event. So the more specific you are in that clarification, the easier it is to find your end to the circumstance.